So thanks for joining the webinar. We are very happy to have our first speaker, Verena Tiefenbeck, online with us. Verena is a professor from the FIU University in Nuremberg, and she will talk about the role of behavioral change in the context of this crisis that we're trying to understand through this webinar. So I'm really glad to have Verena online to give you some insights. We can switch to the speaker screen.
Hello, good afternoon. Should I take over from here?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so welcome everybody from my side, and thanks for having me here for this brief talk. As already mentioned, I'm working at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg as a professor, and also I'm a senior researcher at ETH Zurich. And it is my pleasure to talk about behavior change. And what I want to do is to talk about one study in particular in the context of resource conservation, but also talk a bit about, well, what is similar there when we compare the effects and what we observed in that study with what's currently going on in the corona containment situation. So let me briefly share my screen, 1 second, or I probably cannot do that given that I'm not the host, right? No, I can. 1 second, yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So yeah, the title is, of this talk is Behavior Change, Lessons Learned from Saving Polar Bears in the Shower and from Fighting Corona. And I must say that I dedicated more time to saving polar bears in the shower than to fighting corona in the previous years, obviously. But you will also see what I mean with saving polar bears in the shower, which I know is kind of a strange title at first glance. Well, many people ask themselves, how can they change behavior? So a lot of people actually want to change their own behavior. For instance, a lot of people want to lose weight, or a lot of people try to, you know, exercise more, or maybe try to get up earlier in the morning. Then a lot of other people try to change behavior of people that they care about. So for instance, making their children do something which they do not always do, or maybe change their relationships also with the partners or with their friends. And yet other people, they want to change our society in general. So do something about climate change and so on. And I guess the question is, the question of how can I actually make myself or other people change their behavior is as old as humanity. And I think one of the good news is that with information technologies, we actually have more ways, more instruments to do that. Because, well, we have data available now from almost every aspect of our life. So including data on our shopping behavior, data on our mobility patterns, data on our physical activities, maybe on our sleeping patterns, data on the electricity and water consumption in our homes, and maybe also some data that are being collected on our mood, on our facial expressions while we are driving a car, for instance. So there's a lot of data that is available and that can allow us, well, at least to see which measures that are being taken for behavior change are successful and which are not. So for instance, in the corona situation, there's the whole debate about collecting or tracing human mobility using apps to see who actually interacted with whom and who could potentially have infected whom. So I mean, that is just one example. But I think it's just one facet out of a whole development that allows us in general to, understand what makes people change their behavior, what works and what doesn't. And a second aspect of information technology is that it also allows us to provide information to people at the moment when they actually make a decision. So we can provide really very specific, context-specific information to individuals while they are making a decision. So for instance, in the moment when they're in the supermarket purchasing a product, or at the moment when they are driving, or when they are consuming energy at home. So all of a sudden it's possible to provide information to people during these processes using our smartphones, using, for instance, electricity smart meters, using in-home displays. So we have more and more possibilities both to measure behavior and to understand decision processes, but then also to influence behavior one way or another. And I think that's really exciting, not only, you know, from a research point of view, but also for society and for companies, obviously. I will also come to the downsides of that towards the end, but I would like to give you one example of behavior change intervention that we implemented in the sustainability context. So first of all, a lot of people have tried to change behavior in the sustainability context, obviously. And among the most widespread type of interventions are so-called home energy reports. These home energy reports are kind of, yeah, utility bills that contain additional information and some, you know, tweaks and behavioral instruments that actually, yeah, are supposed to tell people about how much energy they've been using in the previous month and how that compares to the neighbors, for instance, and with a goal to actually make people reduce their energy consumption at home. Those home energy reports, well, since they were mailed out typically, so they're paper-based reports being mailed out, well, people typically get them in a monthly or quarterly rhythm. And you can obviously imagine that, you know, with so much, with so much of a time lag, very often people have no idea when they, for instance, see that they used a lot of electricity, they cannot really tell which appliance or which behavior actually, well, was responsible for the large consumption. So the idea was that we could use, or that it's obviously possible to use information technologies to tap into real-time data, and for instance to make energy consumption or electricity consumption available to consumers in a, let's say, 15 or 30 minute resolution, for instance on web portals, or even at a more granular level, almost in real time on in-home displays that people have at home sitting somewhere on a shelf. When we compare the timing of the information that people receive from these different media, it's obvious that, well, the information provided on in-home displays is much closer to the action. But I put down that the information is available theoretically in real time and not in real time, because I think that in many situations, well, you know, while you're cooking or while you, I don't know, while you're engaging in some other energy consuming activity, well, you probably don't, you know, spend your day staring at a little display like that. So in many situations, you only see the information also a couple of minutes or an hour later or so. The interesting thing is that there was a huge wave of enthusiasm associated with these modern information technologies to actually deliver much larger energy savings compared to these widely used home energy reports. And also that it's a scalable means of making people reduce their electricity consumption, since smart meters are being rolled out in almost every household worldwide. Unfortunately, this did not really materialize. So it turned out that actually the savings that resulted from these paper-based home energy reports, they were almost as large as the savings that were observed in larger field studies where web portals or in-home displays were used. So savings effects ranged between 0 and 4% of a household's electricity consumption, which, you know, is a start, obviously. It's also clearly more cost effective than trying to, well, let's say improve efficiency on the production side by 3, 4, 5%. But, well, it clearly won't change the world, right? And so the question is, well, with all the tools that we have available, can't we do more than that? Together with a team of researchers, we try to do more about it. And I can say that we were successful actually in bringing about a larger change. So what we did is that we focused on a particular behavior, a particular activity. So rather than showing people how much electricity their household is using on an aggregated level, we only show them the consequences of a particular energy intensive activity. So that way we were able to give them concrete and actionable feedback. And I think that really is what made the difference. What we also did is that we provided the information in real time. So as the individual engages in the activity and while he or she can still change their behavior and not only find out later on, oh yeah, yesterday I used too much energy, or this is more than I wanted to use, but really to have the information available at their fingertips during the activity. And the context to which we applied this was energy consumption and also water consumption in a shower, which at first sounds a bit weird, you know, sometimes. But there are actually a bunch of good reasons why it makes sense to actually provide information to people on the energy use in the shower. Because, well, first of all, water heating is the second largest energy end use in typical homes, both in Europe and in America. And showering accounts for the vast majority of that. So it's actually much, much more important than, you know, switching off lights and stuff, or the energy consumption related to cooking or doing your laundry. So water heating and showering really is a big, ticket on your energy expenses. Also, as the insulation level of building improves, water heating eventually will be even the largest residential energy end use. Also, it's an activity that almost everybody engages in on a daily basis. And it's an activity where we actually have quite a high level of control. So it's not like our refrigerator where we can only, you know, determine the energy consumption, well, when we buy it and, you know, by the degree to which we open and close the door. But showering, I mean, the energy consumption and the water consumption in the shower is really depending on our behavior to a large degree. And also there are now clear social norms regarding how long you actually should take your shower, which make it a more interesting case. So the study that we implemented, in the study we collected data from nearly 47,000 showers over a period of 2 months from people living in Zurich. So we had almost 700 Swiss households who participated in the study. And we wanted to find out, well, how much energy, how much water can we actually conserve when people get real-time feedback during the activity, so at the point of energy consumption. And we also wanted to understand what are actually the drivers that change how such a feedback technology works. The device that we used in the study looks like this. It's a little shower meter that the participants themselves installed between the shower hose and the shower head, so that it was visible at eye level actually. And the standard version of these devices displays different elements, including how much water was consumed since you started your shower, how much energy consumption people consumed, also the current water temperature, an energy efficiency class. And finally, there was also a little polar bear animation that, well, at the beginning of the shower, the polar bear is standing on a very comfortably on a nice large flow of ice. And as you use more and more energy over time, the ice flow gradually is increasing, is shrinking. And this is why I actually mentioned, I'm talking about saving polar bears in the shower. A nice feature about this device is that it doesn't need a battery. So that means that we can actually collect data for ages, and we don't have to be afraid of losing the data or so, because the device actually is powered by the water flow running through the device. So every time you you have the water running in the shower, the device will activate, will automatically switch on, measure the data, store the data, and then fall asleep again after the shower. In the study that I'm talking about, we had roughly 700 households in Zurich. We only had 1- and 2-person households in that study. And I should also say that those people had also participated in another electricity smart metering study, which made it interesting because we were able to compare the effects of both studies. And what is also interesting is that our sample was actually less environmentally friendly than the average Swiss citizens. So whatever we found in terms of results, it's not a finding that is, particular to, a bunch of people who care very strongly about the environment, but it's actually, behavior from people who are at least not more environmentally friendly than a typical person in Switzerland. And then in addition to the measurement data from the shower, we also collected survey data, so things like socio-demographic information, environmental attitudes, and so on. What we did is the following. At the beginning of the study, during the first 10 showers, the so-called baseline phase, all participants could only see the water temperature. So the idea was simply that the device already measured the water and energy consumption, but the participants, they only saw the device is actually working, it's measuring, it's fine. And then during the second phase of the experiment, in the intervention phase, 2/3 of the participants received feedback on their energy and on their water use in every shower. Whereas 1/3 of the participants continued to see only water temperature. So that was our control group, because we wanted to compare our treated participants, the ones with the feedback, with what's going on in the control group. Maybe there are some, seasonal changes or so that we can really say what is due to the feedback information and what is due to some other, things going on during the 2 months. We also ran a survey both before and after the study to collect additional information. So what did we find? Well, what you see here in this chart is the energy consumption per shower on the y-axis. So you see that a typical shower uses about 2.6 kilowatt-hour of energy. That's actually enough to power a CFL light bulb, so energy-saving light bulb, non-stop for an entire week. So just a single 4-minute shower. What you see on the on the x-axis is more or less time. So here you see the consumption of the control group. So a typical shower in the control group during the baseline phase, used 2.6 kilowatt-hours roughly. We see that this didn't change that much in the control group. So actually over time they increased a little bit their consumption, but it was kind of stable behavior that we observed. So what happened in the treatment group? Well, first of all, during the baseline phase, when everybody only saw the water temperature on the device, they used the same amount of energy per shower, which is good because that means that the randomization had worked out the assignment to the different groups. So what happened then once the feedback was activated on the devices? Well, we see that the treatment group really reduced the consumption substantially. And they did it from the very first moment that the feedback was being provided. So you see that they clearly, from the beginning on, they dramatically decreased the water consumption compared to the control group. And you also see in the difference between those two lines that the effect actually remains stable throughout the 2 months. So we have had on average a 22% conservation effect in the energy use per shower, which is really massive. I could also tell the same story in terms of water conservation, because the energy consumption is based, the calculation of the energy consumption is based on water consumption times the temperature gradient. But yeah, I think for simplicity, let's stick to the energy outcomes. So the question is, you could argue, well, yeah, 22% savings, but it's only 22% savings in your shower behavior. How can you actually compare that to, energy savings, or more specifically to electricity savings that are observed in other studies? Well, here it's nice that our participants actually participated in electricity smart metering study as well. And what we see is that actually we do not only find a much larger relative effect size of 22%, but we also have a much larger absolute impact on the energy use of those households. Because the 22% of shower energy conserved, they translate into 452 kilowatt hours of annual energy reduction in annual energy consumption, versus the roughly 3% of conservation effect on electricity use in those same households, only translated into 86 kilowatt hours of energy use. So in other words, by focusing on a single specific energy intensive behavior, we achieve a treatment effect, an absolute treatment effect that is 5 times larger than by providing some generic information on kilowatt hours of your electricity use in the household. So this clearly proves, in our opinion, that it makes much more sense to focus on particular energy intensive processes and to provide the information during that activity, compared to providing some abstract generic information on household energy use. I think, and what we found in this study and in subsequent follow-up study was that it's really important to provide the feedback during the activity and on a precise activity. One element that certainly also helped, that there were rather few distractions in the shower. So for instance, it's actually hard to get people's attention, and the shower is probably one of the few moments when people are not using their cell phone, are not getting distracted by that. So that clearly also helped to get people's attentions and then to focus their attention on the display. So the key message there is that it's really important to make resource consumption salient when behavior change is possible, so during the activity. Now, finally, a question is what do we learn from that, or how does it actually compare to the whole, Corona situation? And one thing that occurred to me was that with coronavirus containment, well, what is actually striking in the current situation is the level of attention that is also brought to the present situation, because there's an incredible level of public attention. I mean, our daily lives are completely disrupted at the moment. Shops are closed. We limit our social interactions and everything. And I think it's for a good purpose. We have probably prevented the deaths of a lot of people. But when we take a closer look, to some extent, it's also striking how high the attention brought to this issue is compared to other diseases, for instance. And for me, the question is how actually other, issues, other diseases could also, be successful in doing something like that, or how we could benefit in fighting climate change from a similar, traction and level of attention. Because just to compare a little bit the numbers of diseases, we had, until today, we had 230,000 people who died, well, registered cases of people dying from corona, which certainly is a horrible thing. But I think what's also interesting is that every single year we have 1.5 million people who die from tuberculosis. We have between 300 and 700,000 people who die from influenza-associated deaths. We have more than 2.8 million people who die from the results of being overweight and obese. And I do not want to question what's going on with corona containment. I think it's actually really impressive to see that as a society we can change behavior, we can take the means to do something about it. But to some extent, I'm also wondering to what extent we could not also, get some more traction, some more behavior change to phenomena that are also, very serious and that usually do not receive the same amount of the same level of attention, and where it would clearly also make sense to do something about it. So, and I think a key thing here is that attention of people is really limited, and so it really is important to somehow find effective ways to, get attention for the cause that you're trying to address. And I think we are still at the beginning of actually finding out what works to, well, get people's attentions on a daily basis in energy intensive activities on the one hand, but then also to get public attention at a societal level for behavior change to, for important things like including climate change, including premature death of too many people, and for many other good causes that are worth fighting for. And if you're interested in the study that I talked about, the shower study, you find 2 links to 2 research articles with more extensive information on them. And now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Verena, for your talk. Super interesting and super encouraging also to see how strong the effect can be of such an intervention. We did receive some question while you were speaking, and maybe let's just start with this one, which might sound a bit funny, but maybe you also thought about it. So we're wondering, how much do you think that the results are also influenced by the emotional component of showing a relatable consequence of behavioral change? So for example, the fact of actually having a bear rather than versus just showing numbers. So do you think that this is something that has an effect on the results, or would the results be the same if you were just showing participants figures?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and we actually did another study to find that out, and we actually found that the polar bear does not make a difference. The polar bear makes a big difference when you want to get the media attention, because usually when somebody writes an article about, some journalist writes an article about one of these studies, they always talk about the polar bear in the headline because it's kind of sticky, it's catchy, people remember it, people talk about it, but it's actually not the element that makes a big of a difference. If anything, it rather seems to decrease the effect, and we had a lot of hypotheses why that actually could be the case. But I mean, we ran 2 studies actually, and in the second one, the larger one, we actually concluded that the polar bear, it doesn't make a big difference. What is much more meaningful is actually having a clear number that people understand and that they can associate with a precise behavior. So my shower now today used, I don't know, 40 liters of water, and liters of water is a unit that I can understand, that is kind of meaningful for me. So people in Europe, at least, they're familiar with liters from drinking water and beer and milk and so on. And so it's a meaningful unit that they can actually process and understand.
Great. That's interesting to hear. And I think one more question would be, so basically, what are the recommendations that you would give? And also because you were talking about a bit the current context, and probably also consumption behavior are changing a lot. Mm-hmm. So maybe showers will become no longer the things in which we consume so much energy, but there will be other elements that we might also have to take into account, especially mm-hmm. because we're, as you were saying, staying much more at home and we are changing behavior a lot. So what's the next smart meter we should be thinking of?
Well, I do hope that people keep taking showers.
You never know.
No, but more seriously, I think that one of the things that we also learned in our research is the importance of focusing on the important things, because there are so many activities going on in the sustainability context related to switching off lights, unplugging cell phone chargers, and things like that, that are actually, from an impact point of view, are not very meaningful. And the only thing they do is they distract the attention away from the important stuff, because people get the feeling, oh yeah, I'm always unplugging my cell phone charger and I'm switching off the lights, I'm a good person, I'm doing my part for the environment. But at the end of the day, they are not doing something meaningful, and they are actually, and this kind of perception of, oh, I'm doing my part, kind of gives a lot of people the impression that on other things they can be, more indulgent or whatever, or that they don't have to pay. I mean, you cannot be a saint in every aspect, and which makes that people then actually start being much more, well, that people actually care much less about the relevant things in their daily energy consumption, which is space heating, water heating, also mobility. And these are the big things that one should focus on, rather than being distracted by things like unplugging your cell phone charger and switching off lights, which honestly is, in my opinion, to a certain point, a distraction, and where a lot of the awareness campaigns rather, probably create negative impacts by simply overwhelming people with a whole list of advice of what they should and should not do in their daily lives. So at the end of the day, most people just say, hey, this is too much, I'm just picking a few selective things here and there. And typically people go for the easier things, which unfortunately are not the ones that are actually effective.
Thank you so much for your talk. Obviously, there would be many other questions to ask, but we already have the next speaker ready to start. So thank you so much again, Verena. That was, I think, really inspiring and helpful also for our participants that are thinking right now about what they can think as new solution for the current situation. So maybe someone will actually come up with a smart meter showing a different type of animal. So yeah, thanks so much again. It was really nice to have you online, and we are sure actually that this was very inspiring for many participants.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and thank you very much to everyone, and enjoy the rest of the event. And yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.